WNST. Run. Obviously, we're running horses around a track around here during the 1 week when the Kentucky Derby, and will look to justify its Triple Crown standing. And the Orioles have been trying to run through the raindrops with the Phillies this week, but they will be arriving in this man's hometown where they still play a pretty good brand of baseball up there in a pretty iconic stadium and a place where they're playing some great baseball right now this summer. This guy has seen all the bad, all the good, all the curses of the Bambinos and trying to settle down Shaughnessy as well as Peter Gammons over the years. He wrote what in the old parlance would be called a takedown of the Orioles organization in a Sunday Notes column this weekend, and they are legendary for their Sunday Notes columns. Phil Jackman and I were reading those back in the 1980s. Nick Cafardo has been doing all things Red Sox for the Globe since 1984, and he called the Orioles the most dysfunctional organization in baseball that should be a crown jewel of the sport. And that's only because Nick Cafardo was around when Earl Weaver and Knife the Mac and all that stuff was going on. Nick, I want to welcome you back to Baltimore and on to the program here. And certainly your column not only has stirred up some Orioles fans here, the few that are left, but also is a very, very telling sign of how the media here, outside of myself, has been neutered. This is a very obvious story to be writing here this summer. It's not being written in Baltimore, and I'm really glad you wrote it. First off, good day to you, and don't beat the Orioles up too bad this weekend and stealing 3 or 4 wins, okay?
That's right. They played a lot better lately, and the Red Sox have not played as well lately, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's when I kind of looked at the Orioles organization, I really felt that it was more of a disorganization more than anything. I'm not saying that every organization has to be a cookie cutter, flow to it, but this one makes no sense to me. I mean, every organization, in my opinion, has to have a head of the organization, and that's usually the president of baseball operations, which most teams have now. Or the general manager. So in this case, the head of the organization should be Dan Duquette, and Buck Showalter should report to him. Brady Anderson should report to him. And that's not the case.
That's never really been the case here. I mean, at one point he had 2 general managers, but none. Anytime that he had Pat Gillick or Kevin Malone running the place, he always had a consigliere. He always had Sid Thrift visiting him. After that, it was Mike Flanagan visiting him. Rick Dempsey was always visiting him to undo Perlazzo. And then, later on, the sort of eunuch managers they had with Juan Samuel and Dave Tremblay. It's been a mess from the beginning, but look, I had a late-night phone call from Brady Anderson about a decade ago, and when things sort of hit rock bottom, and this rock bottom was when Flanagan put a gun in his mouth. Let's make no mistake about that. For me, that was rock bottom, but before that even happened, Brady called me one night and said, what's going on around there? And I said, dude, the place is a disaster. The Red Sox were in town last week, and they brought 45,000 fans with them, including my father-in-law. My wife's from Manchester, New Hampshire, and shares the same high school as Mike Flanagan, which one of the reasons I shared my affinity for Mike Flanagan. But, he sort of willed his way back in. I mean, I was one of his first phone calls. He obviously knows the boys well. He obviously, Mr. A gave him 36 million reasons to like him back in the day when he was hitting 51 home runs, wink, wink, without any performance-enhancing drugs, and now he stands somehow in running the organization while he has a locker in the locker room and is hitting fungos, and Nolan Ryan's living at his house in the offseason, and he's working with pitchers off a mound when he was a center fielder. It's the most bizarre thing, but it falls right in line with everything Peter has done from the beginning. And you were around back when this organization was run by Edward Bennett Williams. You were around when this team could have easily have gone to Washington, D.C. after the Colts left here in 1984. And we've built this stadium, and it's really a sad thing, Nick, to see a Montreal Expos game break out at Camden Yards. And when they have this kind of a start, they're trying to let kids in for free, and nobody's even bringing their kids for free. We've really got a damaged brand here, and part of it is, who will save this? How can this be made better and made whole? And philosophically, as long as Peter's alive and they're afraid of him and he's sort of running it but not running it, and they haven't had a press conference here in 20 years for ownership, Nick. Like, no one really knows who to ask a question to, because I don't think anybody ever really believed Dan was running the show, really, right?
Yeah. Well, there are many other problems I see, and they all stem from ownership and not giving Duquette the resources he needs. I mean, he has the smallest administrative staff, the smallest scouting staff in baseball. I mean, they literally don't have people out in the field like most teams do to evaluate players and things of that nature, which are very basic things.
That's not well known here, by the way. That's something I've never accused them of, because I don't know that for a fact, because I don't have a press pass to talk to the other general managers anymore.
Well,
you do, and if they're all telling you that there are never Orioles scouts at my games, well, that sort of falls in line with how the organization has been run from the beginning, right?
Yeah, I mean, the contrast is like the Red Sox, for instance. They have 40, I mean, this is the excessive part of it. They have 49 vice presidents in their organization, which is a little ridiculous. But the Orioles, they have Dan Duquette and they have a couple of guys that help them out. But they have only one full-time analytic person in this day and age, which is ridiculous. And they have another half guy that they use. So they have 1.5 analytical people plus a few interns doing analytics.
How many does Theo have with the Cubs, just as an example?
Well, he probably has like 20. The Red Sox have 15 to 20. I mean,
wow.
Most organizations, even Tampa Bay has tons of them, I mean, so you got to have that now, and you got to have scouts. You got to have a combination of both.
Well, these are not expensive people, right? What does an analytics scout make? $100,000, $80,000? I mean, but it's not.
Maybe, around that.
Yeah. I mean, a living, a normal living. This is not a huge expense when you're paying Chris Davis $28 million, right?
And here's the other thing. I mean, they have virtually they don't devote any money to international scouting. I mean, or signing international players. I mean, how can you do that in this day and age? I mean, this is where the greatest players in the game come from.
Well, the old man has always hated foreign industry. Like, he won't allow a foreign car into the signage or onto any of the media. This is a fact, okay? He will not allow foreign anything around the team. And from an advertising perspective. And it's bizarre. I mean, this has been going on for 20 years. So this sort of plays into them not signing international players. And if you Google it hard, Nick, and I know you know all this, they got thrown out of Korea about 5-6 years ago. There were literally signs up saying no Orioles scouts allowed in 2 languages in Korea because they broke the rules over there that the Korean government laid out.
Yeah, I do remember that, yeah. So these are the many red flags I see with this organization, and again, it shouldn't be that way. This is obviously an iconic ballpark, a great city for baseball. It really is. I mean, the tradition and the great names that have played there, and this shouldn't be happening there. And I don't know what the solution is other than the Angelos selling the team to someone else. I mean, maybe the Angelos Sons will wake up and realize that some of this stuff is happening and do something about it. But it seems to, and then all of a sudden they do something as unpredictable as signing Chris Davis to that contract, and that money should have been devoted to a frontline pitcher, as we know. So they do things like that, and I don't know. It makes me scratch my head just looking at it from afar. I'm not there, and I don't know, the ins and outs. But looking at it from afar and talking to former employees there that have horror stories to tell, it just doesn't look right to me.
Nick Cafardo has written in the Boston Globe about the Orioles' dysfunction. Around here, you lose your press credential for writing stories like this. But certainly, you talk about the former employees singing. The one guy who's never spoken was Andy MacPhail. And, Nick, I've written a book. You can go Google it, The Peter Principles. I've got 14 chapters out online about all of the dysfunction, quoting all the Tim Kirchens, all the Buster Olneys, all the Jason Starks, all the Murray Chasses, all the the Peter Gammons that came through here back in the 1990s. Ken Rosenthal was at the front line of all of that in being threatened by Angelos. At one point, if you Google it, Angelos sent a fax to the Baltimore Sun calling Ken Rosenthal's column the caterwaulings of an insolent twit. So, you know, this was the lawyer speak of the 1990s, and this is clearly how Davey Johnson got ran off, Frank Wren got ran off, Pat Gillick and Kevin Malone and all those players got run off. And then there was that period where they couldn't hire anyone. And I would put it to you about Dan Duquette. I mean, Dan Duquette was literally outside the game of baseball, running baseball in the Cape Cod, and had no in to get a job. Why was Dan sort of blackballed? I mean, why couldn't Dan get a legitimate job? Because no one legitimate wanted to work for Peter. I mean, Peter was out of options. There were no assistant general managers. Everyone in the sport had been told by their agents, by their friends, by their scouting buddies, don't take that job. Wait for the Royals, wait for the Padres, wait for the Rangers, wait for someone else to hire you. You don't want to go to Baltimore to work. And that's how Dan wound up here to begin with. And you mentioned the boys being involved. The boys' involvement was to bring Brady Anderson in because they like hanging out with him because he's, you know, he's a good guy and all that stuff. He's a ball player, and they love that sort of thing. They were rotisserie nerds back in the 90s, bringing Chris Sabo through here and Sid Fernandez, and all of that is well documented as well. I don't know that we have Rocky Wirtz, you know, that when the old man goes, these guys are going to be competent baseball people because they've been watching it for a quarter of a century. That's what Brady's here for. And it really feels like this summer specifically, with all the moving parts of Duquette and Buck and Adam Jones and all these players being at the end of their term, the real question is who will be the one picking the players that they will get in return for Manny Machado or Britton and or Brock or any of the guys they're going to deal, maybe Adam Jones. And I don't know who's picking those players. I know it's not Andy McPhail anymore. And the reason this team played in the ALCS 3 years ago was because Andy McPhail was, you know, fleece Seattle for Tillman and Jones, fleece Texas to get Chris Davis. And that's how this team got good, as well as drafting the Manny Machados and bringing in the Jonathan Scopes. But Andy McPhail's long gone at this point, and good moves have not been made around here in a long, long period of time. There have not been a lot of good decisions here the last 3 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have, you know, listen, Manny Machado is, you got to get a lot for him, and someone's got to make that decision. I would hope it would be Duquette that makes that decision. Obviously, I have a pass with him in Boston, and I thought he made some incredible deals. You know, getting Jason Varitek and Derek Lowe for Heathcliff Slocum was pretty good, you know. So he's made some great deals in the past. So I just think he's very competent, and I think if he was allowed to run the organization, I think he would do a good job. He's very good also with international players, and they won't let him to do that. You know, it's like what, you know what I mean. So you know, that's where I stand on it, and you know, I think with Buck. You know, that's another big issue, you know. I mean, I've never seen a manager with so much power. You know, the last one I saw like that was Scioscia. And he, you know, now that organization is running the way it's supposed to run with Billy Epler definitely in charge and Scioscia underneath him. And that's the way it should be. I think Dan Duquette, if he wants to fire Buck Showalter, should be able to fire Buck Showalter, but he doesn't have that power to do that. So that's why I just think the whole thing is kind of a mess. I mean, we saw here in Boston where Dave Dombrowski fired John Farrell after winning 2 divisional championships. You know, and any decision like that has to be run through the owner. But Dombrowski went to the ownership and said, "This is what I think we need to do." And the ownership said, "Well, you got to do what you think is right," and they let him do it. And I think that's what's kind of missing here with the Orioles.
What was that kind of offseason all the way around? I mean, Girardi, Farrell, and then Dusty Baker, you know, that's what you aspire to do, is play games in October and have a skipper get you there. All 3 of those guys got canned. I mean, I think our level of expectation amongst baseball managers is different. But you get back to Duquette, and when he sniffed around Toronto 3 years ago, which is a very obvious move from one position to another position. In the industry, it's very common to let someone go or re-up them and reward them and give them a new title and make them comfortable. That's not the way it works around here. here. I mean, this is literally the third, maybe fourth general manager who didn't want the job anymore, who was forced to keep it. Going back to Gillick and Malone and Frank Wren, who all sort of wanted off the boat at various points and weren't allowed. And then there were guys like Mike Flanagan and Sid Thrift who could never have gotten the job anywhere else because they probably, and Brady Anderson. I mean, if Brady Anderson gets cut loose, he won't be running the Dodgers next week. There's no doubt about that. The competence level and the hiring that they do, that you would keep a guy who doesn't want the job anymore, who wants to be in Toronto. There's no other industry in the world. Nick, if the New York Times wanted you, the Boston Globe would say go, because if you don't want to be here anymore, we can't have you here anymore. Any business owner would say that.
Well, yeah, but the difference is he was going for a major promotion. This was that's just a courtesy. If you're not going to make Dan Duquette the president of the Baltimore Orioles, and the Toronto Blue Jays want him to be the president, then don't you have to let the guy go? I mean, that's a major promotion for him, and they said no, and I think that's very discourteous, I think, and that's not a good thing to do to an employee who has a chance to better himself.
Well, especially a guy that got you to the ALCS and did everything you asked him to do. Nick Cafardo is our guest. He has been one of the baseball columnists since 1984 at the Boston Globe. You can follow him at Nick Cafardo. That's Cafardo. Nick, many people in Baltimore requested that I get you onto the program after sharing your story with me along my social media. Well, what begat this? Obviously, the Orioles visiting this weekend and the malaise, but why is a Boston guy write? I mean, I know you write a column around the league, but this story comes to you. The awfulness of the Orioles should be a major story to me throughout baseball, and you're the first guy to maybe tackle it here. But I guess as they make their travels around the country and the Machado fire sale sits out there, and I'm not even convinced they're going to deal him at all, because I'm not convinced anybody's going to offer a life-changing Moncada kind of deal to get there. And they don't have bidders right now. I mean, the Dodgers aren't a bidder. They're 10 games under 500. I mean, they won't deal with the Red Sox or the Yankees because they're in division and they're scared to death of that. So they're at a limited way, and it's a limited time offer to rent Manny Machado for 8 weeks. I only think there's so much value in that in the modern era.
Yeah, that could be true. If you just go back to the off season when he was dangled out there were teams that interested. There were good 6-7 teams that called Duquette and made some offers. So I think those teams will still be out there. We're talking about a great ball player, so a guy who could definitely make a difference on your pennant race. And let's face it, there's only about 6 or 7 good teams in baseball right now, anyway. So those are the teams that will go after him, including a team like the Phillies, who have played a lot better than everybody expected, and they have a lot of money to spend, and they feel that they probably could re-sign him, after the rental period. So, I think there will be teams, and Duquette, I know, is not afraid to trade him to an AL East team. I think above him would be afraid to trade him there, but Duquette himself would not be afraid. Obviously, he made the Eduardo Rodríguez, Andrew Miller deal with the Red Sox, and was allowed to do that. So that won't be a factor. But I think the story is very obvious to me about the Orioles, and I'm sure it will be obvious to other people as well as time goes on, that the whole organization is just not run properly, and it stands out like a sore thumb to me around baseball. I mean, there's a few other places that you kind of scratch your head about, including Tampa Bay. I have no idea what goes on there either, but at least they have some semblance of a plan. They're heavily into analytics and the numbers, and that's what they do. And I don't completely agree with that philosophy, but that at least they have one.
Well, they literally are poor. I mean, I cover football for a living and hockey for a living, and everybody's, on an equal playing field. There's nothing fair about the Tampa Rays playing in a division with the Yankees and the Red Sox. I mean, I could make a case for the Orioles, how many hundreds of millions of dollars Angelos has stuffed into his pocket, and that the New York Supreme Court's trying to get $400 million of it back for Ted Lerner down in D.C., which, I've talked at length about how that amount of money that Angelos has put on his side of the table that's in his bank account, that's the money that's going to fund Bryce Harper, quite frankly, for the Nationals. Yeah. It's up to over $400 million of disputed money now, and that's going to fall on the plate of the kids as well, as the empty stadium, as the Masson and the cord cutting is all there. But one thing for sure, the Yankees and Red Sox are going to be in this division. They're going to be loaded for bear. And Nick, I go back to when the Nationals were created. I was a big lobbyist to get the Orioles out of the American League East. Now, that was a time when the Orioles weren't selling any tickets, and the Red Sox, my father-in-law, all my in-laws are down here those weekends, the Yankees fans, they would routinely sell 500,000 tickets to Yankees and Red Sox fans during those 5 and 6 and 7 seasons. I thought the best thing the Orioles could do was move to the National League and deal with the Braves and the Phillies and take on that side of things instead of dealing with the Yankees and the Red Sox. And I feel like 10 years later we're back into that cycle again where, boy, the Orioles are a long, long, long way on the calendar away from being where the Yankees and the Red Sox are, because not only are the Yankees and the Red Sox rich, they're loaded with young talent at this point, new managers, new philosophy, and look at what it's begat. I mean, this Yankee-Red Sox rivalry over the next 3 to 5 years is going to be as good as anything we're going to witness in baseball.
No, I agree. Yeah, I agree.
But it's going to subjugate everything else. I mean, everybody else is going to be, 13 and 28 or whatever, which is, kind of difficult to watch. And unless you draft well, you're in trouble. Give me a little Red Sox primer. We're going to see you guys this weekend. It's a hell of a ball club you guys put together up there.
Yeah, I mean, there are some warts that are starting to show up a little bit. The bullpen hasn't been as good as it was last year, and now they have a major injury to Carson Smith, who they really were going to rely on to be a setup guy, and so they've got to deal with that. And the starting pitching should be really good, but it hasn't been. Other than Chris Sale, they really have to get David Price on track, and we'll see if that happens. But I mean, they should have 5 very good starters, but maybe only one of them is, or Porcello hasn't been that bad either. Maybe 2 of them are doing the job right now, so that's a problem. The offense is much better than it was last year. Mookie Betts is a superstar, tremendous player to watch. J.D. Martinez has been great as far as power and overall hitting, and so they have it going offensively, but a little problem defensively at third base. The kid Rafael Devers, who's going to be a heck of a player, but he's got his problems at third base. And so the rest of it's good, but they do have a few warts, and the Yankees are monsters. Let's face it; they have an incredible lineup, and they pitch a lot better than anybody thought they would.
He is Nick Cafardo. He's at the Boston Globe. You can go follow him. He wrote a phenomenal Sunday baseball notes piece on the Orioles. And, I'll leave you with this because I loved how stern your words were. Get your act together. Nick, I've been telling them to get their act together now for a quarter of a century. And all it's gotten me was thrown out of the building and, and treated like fake news and a heretic. So anytime...
Well, I hope they let me in.
Well, I tell you what, you guys come to town on, June 11th. Good luck with that. If not, you can come over to my place. I'll give you free beer. We got the game in HD, and you can watch Palmer and Thorne call the game, all right?
Okay, great.
Nick, be well. Always a pleasure, man. Keep up the great work.
Bye-bye.
A man of high integrity and great baseball insight, Nick Cafardo, been covering baseball up in Boston in 1984, and in the fine tradition of how it goes, telling it like it is, like it used to be, and the way it always will be. BuyAToyota.com Audio Vault is there 24 hours a day. From anywhere in the world, we got tons of Preakness coverage around here before, during, and after the race out on our social media. Reminder, we're going to be out at Michael's Cafe on Saturday night for Game 5 of the Stanley Cup Eastern Conference Finals. The Caps trying to make it right. I am not going to Tampa Saturday. They're running a little race around here, so we'll be out at Michael's Cafe getting the split-level soup. I see a crab cake in my future. My wife sees a prime steak in her future and probably a little bottle of Malbec on the side. Maybe celebratory if we bet Justify and hit ourselves an exacta or a triple on Saturday out at Old Hilltop. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.